Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mindset, Money, Success. And I'm your host, Loraine Marshall. And today I'm going to cover a topic that has been a main factor in my life for the last 4 years, and that is when the legal system fails. And it's a survivor's legal survival guide from my lived experience. But before we dive into that, I have got a donation page. And if you'd like to support the podcast and my survival funds, then the link is buymeacoffee.com/success with Loraine. And the links will be in the show notes and below this video. So let's get started with this week's episode. So first of all, back in 2020, all of my friends are telling me I need legal advice. Now, I'm basically in grief and shock. Don't know whether I'm coming or going. And it's COVID. It's October of 2020, and legal advice is pretty difficult to find. I did get some legal advice via email, and that legal advice was pretty straightforward. Remain in the property. If I'm threatened again, then call the police. She gave me the telephone number of a support for gender violence in Spain, where I'm living. So that was the first initial advice. Nothing wrong with that. Then I find a lawyer who's able to see me face to face, and I attend a meeting with that lawyer, and I go to the office with emails that have gone backwards and forwards between me and now ex-partner. And then I had a recording that was taken of a meeting that we held face to face, which was meant to be an amicable, friendly discussion, which actually turned out not to be very friendly at all. So I take the evidence with me and sit down with that solicitor who could understand English, which is a massive factor when you're in a foreign country, because obviously you get nowhere very fast with the language barriers. And so sat down, he looked at the emails, I explained a few things, he listened to the recording, and it got to a point in that recording where there was a huge, massive, bang, and then you could hear my partner shouting very loud, saying not very nice things, and the solicitor said, "Stop, what just happened there?" And I told him that my ex-partner had just banged his hand down on a glass table right in front of me, and then said what he said, which was something like that he would make me leave in November, because he'd already said that he was going to give me 4 months to find somewhere to live and to go to another property. And it was really intimidating, basically, because he'd snapped and he got really angry and intimidating. So that lawyer then said, "You need to file a gender violence complaint." Now, that was earth-shattering sort of information, because that's not what I was expecting to hear. And I remember saying to that lawyer, "Can you not just write to our solicitor?" Because I thought, well, it would be easier to write to the other solicitor because there was this offer on the table, and the offer he had put was 50% of the value of the house. And we'd had the discussion where he was going to pay money, but then all of a sudden everything just escalated. He got really angry. He copied in our solicitor and informed me that he was now going to take legal action to evict me, right? as soon as he had left Spain for the UK, he was going to go to the courts and take legal action to evict me. So it had gone from half of the value of the house, you'll have a safe, secure future, and you can buy another house, you can have any of the furniture. All the promises that he said were gone. Everything. Because now he was going to evict me. And he blamed me for everything that had happened, which obviously I then believed at the time that it was me who caused his anger. And that's not the case, because a victim in a situation is never to blame. And I didn't understand that for a long time. So I said to that solicitor, look, can you not just write to the other solicitor? He looked me in the eye and said, did you not hear what he said? You can't negotiate with him. And I just thought, oh, and this solicitor repeated his advice. You need to file a gender violence complaint. And that was it. I paid the solicitor his money and I went outside. And I was really shaken up by the information and the advice I had got. And I remember that I actually phoned a friend of the family who knew what had happened. And I told her the advice I'd received. And she even said it didn't sound like very good advice. So here's where that failed. One, it failed because that lawyer didn't listen to what I said when I asked if he could write to the other lawyer. And writing to the other lawyer on my behalf with the information that he had may have helped to resolve things at that point. So that was the first thing. So then I was confused. I didn't know whether to file a gender violence complaint, whether to write to the other lawyer myself, because it was difficult enough to find the first solicitor to help. So in the confusion and the grief and the trauma and the anxiety that I was feeling at that time, I decided I would write to the other solicitor. And that's what I did. And I remember that what I'd wrote was, look, I've been advised to file a gender violence complaint. I don't want to do that. I'd rather negotiate. And that's what I wrote. This is how I thought the other lawyer might be able to help. And I didn't realise at that point that I was writing to the enemy. And I did get a reply back. But I just want to read a little bit of what was in the reply from this solicitor. He says, you can, of course, produce a denounce, but please be sure about the facts in your denounce, which is a complaint, as it is possible to process with a complaint against someone. It is possible to prosecute someone who makes a false complaint. So he says he knows, and he would want to insist, that there is a stream of colleagues that are keen in taking any problem for couples, married or in partnership, through this option to denounce with no real facts. And I'm saying this, be careful with this, as I would not like that you could be involved in one of these situations. If you understand that you're in the case, then it is only your decision, and do not worry about the other party, right? So that was what the lawyer said. And I was triggered by some of the emails that I received from that particular lawyer. And I remember reading that in one email, he had said that in time, the judge will order your eviction because you have no rights in this country and it's different to the UK. And when I read that, my stomach sank and I was emotional and had to ring the Samaritans in Spain. I had no one here, no one I could speak to. And I just thought, right. And I rang, and I think I must have been on the telephone with someone at that organisation for about an hour, just being triggered by reading something in the email from a solicitor. And obviously, what I gained from what I was being told about I don't have any rights, later I discovered from the research, from writing my first book, I discovered he wasn't right in telling me I have no rights. Because as a woman, every woman has rights, especially in Europe, that the CEDAW Convention on Against Discrimination, and the other one is the Istanbul Convention on the Elimination of Gender Violence and Discrimination. So women do have rights, and they have human rights, and these were not particularly looked at when I was writing to this solicitor, and when I was ignored by the first solicitor who just repeated his advice. It wasn't until quite a few years later that I discovered through the judicial system that lawyers don't use mediation and ADR, alternative dispute resolutions. They don't use those very much. And even on the Bar Association website, there was articles to suggest that there should be more use of these types of remedies and solutions, right? And obviously that was the remedy and solution I was asking for and was denied because the solicitor didn't listen and just repeated his advice. So the next episode of having a new lawyer was I decided to file a gender violence complaint and go to the police station in the Guardia. So on the day that I did turn up to do that, I'd been advised by the Gender Violence Helpline that you should have a solicitor, you should have a lawyer at the police station when you make a formal complaint, so that the lawyer's backing up what you say and the police can take a statement. Plus, if you've got someone who can understand Spanish and English, and then they can actually look at this, what's written and help you to understand that your statement's been given correctly. Makes sense, doesn't it? Besides, you could be prosecuted if you give a false statement, and and it backs up. If they understand why you're actually there, they can talk in their language, their legal language, to say why I was filing a complaint. Now, obviously, the first solicitor I saw wasn't there. He'd gotten his money. And so I was in the police station and saying, I've been told I need to have a solicitor before I make the complaint. And the police officer looked and said, no, you don't. You just make the complaint. It took 2 tries before I got the complaint done, because at first there wasn't any translator, and so it was really difficult to give a statement of the complaint. And it was a couple of days later, I had to go back again, and I had a translator there. So that was another failure of the system, because I was denied a solicitor at the time of making the complaint. So the third incident, let's think, was when I had to turn up to the court. Within 24 hours, I was in the courthouse to be in front of the women's court, because in Spain it's a women's court. And the solicitor turns up. The translator from the police station was there, and the solicitor turns up with a pile of papers, and it's 30 minutes before the hearing. And all he has is the statement that was taken in the police station, where I'd said I was making a complaint of emotional and psychological abuse. I didn't understand all of the types of hidden forms of abuse at that time, and I wasn't really very good at verbalizing the situation. I couldn't advocate for myself. That's where the lawyer would have been better, to have the lawyer there at the police station at that point. So all the lawyer does is look at the information. He's got all his paperwork ready to be signed. And so I'm just stood there signing all his paperwork 30 minutes before the hearing. We go into the courthouse, and I'm in there, the judge is opposite, there's a microphone and 2 chairs, and there's a translator and prosecution on one side. And I'm like a deer in the headlights in this thing, female judge. And I answered questions, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And after that hearing, the translator explains the judge can't do anything right now. The person that you're making the complaint against, he's in a different country, so you're safe, there's no problem. So they don't want to make a protection order. And she can't bring him back to this country. We talk in October 2020, and there's flight restrictions and there's lockdown, and in the UK, still under lockdown. So it was very difficult. And so that was the court hearing. Now, it was months later, it was January of 2021, when I'm informed again by that same lawyer, that the Free Public Lawyer, that there is another hearing to be heard. And that was in January of 2021. And so I am so filled with trauma and anxiety, and having to go to this second hearing in the gender violence court. And again, the lawyer turns up 30 minutes before the hearing. And at this time, I've processed quite a bit more of the situation I've been in. I've had a few months to work out what was what. And I had some evidence in a folder with me, and I tried to show the evidence to this solicitor, this lawyer, and he waved it away. He wasn't interested. He just said, no, this is just a minor case of verbal abuse. And I'm like, right. I didn't understand. The case that I'd put to the police, my complaint of emotional and psychological abuse, had been entered into the court as one case of minor verbal abuse, and not the longer case of emotional and psychological abuse, because it's never one incident. Any victim will tell you that it's never one incident, because you don't get one incident and then go running to the police. So it's never one incident. And so again, it's in the court. And there's his solicitor's actually power of attorney in this time. He asks me some questions. I'm really triggered by what's going on. Could see that this time it's a male judge. Prosecution's asking for a protection order. And I still didn't really understand what was going on. And then after that, I mean, the translators informing me need to make applications for help, financial help. The first solicitor told me that you would get psychological help. It's all part of the laws in Spain on gender violence, the assistance that people get, that women get after a case has been heard or a protection order is given. So I'm going through that process, and I didn't hear any results of the case. So this was January. Then February goes by, and then it's into March, and nothing has been processed, basically. And I ask the lawyer where the decision is, and he says, have you not got the decision? No. And then I get this decision in March, which then when I read it, understand that the judge had dismissed the allegation of the verbal abuse. So that put an end to that case. I send that sentence to the original lawyer who told me that I should file the gender violence complaint, and he tells me I should appeal. I need to appeal. And I think, right, okay. So I go back to the free lawyer who's appointed and text this message to the lawyer to say, I need to appeal. And that lawyer then states, his job is done. You need to find a new lawyer. So one piece of advice tells you need to appeal. You go to the free lawyer who's been publicly appointed. You ask to appeal, and he says no. Well, I didn't really understand the rules, and I didn't even really understand the laws at that point in a foreign country. But I think that solicitor was wrong, because you should be able to file an appeal. In fact, since that happened in 2021, I do actually know now that the lawyer should have filed an appeal. But unfortunately, I think because it took till March for me to get that sentence, and the decision of the judge was made on the 20th of January by the date of the sentence, perhaps he thought it would be out of time. And so that's why he said his job was done. I don't know. But obviously it didn't help me. So that was the end of that gender violence case. And I went to another organisation. And in that organisation is to help victims of gender violence. And I'm given advice from a free lawyer. And the free lawyer that I see, and I have a translator with me who's a friend, and the free lawyer I see is telling me to stay in the property, you need to negotiate. And I listened to what she said, and I think, how do you negotiate with a person who's already told you in a 26-minute meeting, which he agreed could be recorded, and he said, you cannot negotiate with me. Try telling that to a Spanish solicitor. Well, so in 2021, the mediation company that had involved to try and mediate had failed by May. I had attempted 6 times to negotiate without any success. So basically, I'd already tried to negotiate, but that lawyer, the free lawyer who was giving me the advice to negotiate, hadn't any of the facts, didn't even want to know any of the information. This free lawyer, just said to me, the first lawyer was wrong. The first lawyer was wrong. So this is the conflicting advice that you've got. And these are the systemic failures in the system. There should be a set process in place so that when someone presents with the issue, they can go through this or that. There should be a flow chart of how to proceed. Ask the questions to the victim. Do you want to file a gender violence complaint? Because 9 times out of 10, I think a lot of victims do not want to file a gender violence complaint. But the solicitor who was advising me just went, you need to file a gender violence complaint, that's it. And, you know, it's very difficult for women sometimes to actually think, I really don't want to do that, because the relationship's just ended and you still might have feelings for that person, even though that person has caused a lot of damage emotionally, psychologically, financially. You are in that position to think, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to make that complaint. And I know that a lot of victims will be in that situation, even with sometimes with physical violence. They still don't want to make a complaint. So that is what happened up to then. Now, after those failures, I actually did obtain an agreement that was signed for a much lower sum of money, because there was a buyer ready to put a deposit down on a property. And so I'd agreed and signed to leave the property once the sale was agreed and the money had been paid. And because the gender violence solicitor had told me, it's money first, then leave. And so that was always in my mind. Now, obviously, I'm still in the property. The reason is that the agreement that was signed was never honoured. When the buyers decided not to go ahead, because their advice at that point was, if they put that deposit down to buy a house where I'm still in occupation and I don't leave, then they would become responsible to evict me from the property. So they backed out of buying or wanting to buy this house, which still left me in a precarious situation. And at that point, in 2021, I said to the former partner, you can have vacant possession. You can have the house. Just pay the money first. Based on the advice that I'd been given by the solicitor in the gender violence charity. But he wouldn't, because he kept pressing me. I need a date when you will leave. I need a date of when you will leave. I'm like, how long's a piece of string? Because if you haven't got the money first, how do you know where to go when you've got no funds, no job, nothing. You can't find any landlord who is going to say, yeah, here's a property, when you haven't got a job and you've got no income coming in. I don't think there's that many landlords that will let you sign a tenancy agreement with them when you've got no proof of income. Now, if you had a lump sum of money, you could say, yes, I'll pay 6 months' rent, I'll pay 12 months' rent and pay it in advance. Now, a landlord might think, oh, that's great. I've got money in advance. And then you would get the tenancy. And how do I know this? Because I was in property management for 11 years. And so that's how I know there's landlords out there that will take money and rent in advance. So people who have not very good credit records, but have a lump of money that they can actually pay down in advance, then a landlord will overlook the fact of a poor credit record if you're going to pay money and rent in advance. So that was the middle of 2021. Now, by 2022, I have to apply for another free public appointed lawyer because former partners decided he's going to go ahead with the precarious eviction, the one that he had said he was going to do back in October of 2021. And the only reason that there was all this delay is because nobody could go through the courts to evict people when COVID was still in place and restrictions and moratorium was in place by the government. So it was 2022 before there was court documents for an eviction. And the first meeting with that public appointed lawyer was in May of 2022. And I remember I was so triggered by the things that she said. First of all, she ignored the fact that I had already been into a gender violence court hearing. I gave her the information, but she wasn't interested in understanding what had gone on, trying to explain that the case was dismissed, but it wasn't just one minor verbal abuse. She wasn't interested. She just said that doesn't apply. That's the criminal court. This is the civil court. Now, things that she said were, go back to your family. She didn't ask if I had any family to go back to. She also said, go back to the UK. I don't think that is a good thing to say. It sounds a bit like discrimination. And the other one was, he just wants his house back. And I didn't have the words, and I could still not advocate for myself at that point. And if I had have been more confident and certain, I could have then said to her, but he had the opportunity of his house back last year in 2021 when we signed this agreement so I could leave the house. But I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the words to speak. I wasn't able to advocate for myself. I came out of there and felt emotional, frustrated, angry at what was said in that meeting. And what I obviously then had to go through reading her emails every time a new email arrived from that solicitor who was going to be representing me in a civil court for precarious eviction. Every time an email came in, I couldn't open it straight away because I felt sick. Yeah. So eventually she tells me I have to go to social services and ask for a vulnerability report. She knew I had no form of income. Yeah. So she says I need to report to social services. And to be honest, I didn't want to go there. I didn't really want to go to social services. But then I thought, right, I remember that the victim's office was telling me in 2021 I should go to social services. I'd gone to this CAVI, which has got the social worker, the gender violence organisation, but I'd never been into the main social services. So I made a decision. I'd go to the social services. Turns up, has the appointment, goes in and asks about a vulnerability report or an assessment. I'm sat there and the woman, the social worker, says, no, you can't ask for this. It's the lawyer who asks the court. And then the court asks social services. Well, at that point, I was so annoyed. I sat there in that office and said, well, I'm not leaving here until you call that lawyer because she told me to come here. So the worker goes out of the room and she goes and gets the boss, and the boss comes back into the room and he has 2 yellow sticky notes, and these are placed down on the table in front of me. I look at the sticky notes, what have been written in English, which says exactly the same as this social worker had said. The lawyer who asks the court asks social services. So I pulled the sticky notes off the table, put them in my handbag, and walked out. This is how I was treated in a foreign country, in Spain, as an English woman. The court hearing was in June, and I remember 5 days before the court hearing, I have got evidence that I want to take and submit, and I go to the courthouse with the evidence. First of all, I had a letter which he'd promised a settlement, 50% of the value of the house. Secondly, I had a recording where, again, he'd promised a settlement, 50% of the value of the house, or I could buy his 50% of the property. Then there was the letter agreement that we'd signed together in 2021. And I wanted to submit the evidence. And the court official was telling me I couldn't submit the evidence. Again, I didn't understand the court system here in Spain. I did used to work as an advisor where I'd been to tribunals. I'd been in help as a Mackenzie friend for people who were going to court. So I obviously had a little bit of experience, but to be turned away saying, no, you can't submit any evidence was not what I was expecting. So anyway, what happened was I explained a few things with the use of the unofficial translator, who is the security guard in the courthouse. And the unofficial translator translated everything to the court official. So I told her a little bit of the background story about what had happened. And that court official said, your lawyer is not helping you. And I was told by the court official I should sack that lawyer and make an official complaint at the Bar Association. Again, I didn't understand why she was telling me that. She didn't explain the details of why she was telling me that. So I was thinking, well, how do you make a complaint? there's only 5 days to the hearing, and it's a verbal hearing. I'll be able to speak at this hearing. And so I did remember that the court official said I need to have a translator. And I asked the same translator who had helped in the gender violence case, and he said he would do that for free. So on the day of the court, I had a translator in the hearing with me. Unfortunately, I discovered the reason why this court official had told me to sack that lawyer. I didn't get that information until 2023, when an appeal had been heard after the judge had said that ruled on the eviction. My lawyer, I wrote a letter to that lawyer and said I'd been told I should have sacked you in 2022. I should sack you. So she decided to say, oh, well, we can appeal, we'll give you more time. So she did put an appeal to the higher court, and that appeal was dismissed in the middle of 2023. Now, when that appeal was dismissed, I was looking at alternative solicitors to see what could be done, because I felt that the advice, the court hearing where there was no evidence submitted, where I wasn't allowed to speak in the hearing and no questions were asked, I felt that there'd been some wrongdoing, and I was looking for alternative legal advice. And the lawyer that I spoke to said, you need to get all of the files. So I asked the free lawyer, I need all the files. I got those files in the middle of 2023. Now, flicking through the files, one letter to the court took my notice, which it said something about traductor. And I thought, that means translator. I opened that letter, and that's where I discovered that in May, my legal defence had written to the court to tell them, one, she was not going to interrogate the plaintiff. Firstly, I had already told her that the plaintiff's statements to the court from his lawyer were misleading and not factual. Nearly every paragraph I'd marked on that court document, no, it wasn't factual. So no questions, no, she wasn't going to interrogate the plaintiff. And then she said, neither party speak or understand Spanish. And so, and her client, me, had no form of income and had recognised free legal assistance. So therefore, the court would need to appoint a translator. And I hadn't been informed about this, but I found out, obviously, that is discrimination on the grounds of language and socio-economic status. And that was middle of 2023. And so I did sack the lawyer. It took until November to sack that lawyer. And I then discovered that Article 6 of the Human Rights violation is no fair hearing. So that's the first human rights violation that I uncovered in this situation. With these free public lawyers, there is no continuity. And so the lawyer for the precarious eviction had no idea of what had gone on in the gender violence case, right? So there's no continuity. And another lawyer was appointed, which was a little bit better, but by November of 2023, the first thing that she was having to do, because the courts have heard the situation, they're waiting to just give an eviction date by this. They've heard the appeal. In between, the courts have got strikes going on, so there's massive delays on everything. There's probably they're all overworked and underpaid. So the new lawyer that gets appointed to the case in November of 2023, by December of 2023, she has to write to say the date of the eviction has been set. So writes the date, is March 2024, I'm going to be evicted. Obviously, I wasn't, because I made the complaints again. This is a violation of my human rights. And I had to go back into that courthouse, because you write to these free legal solicitors, they don't respond. That you can write 2 or 3 emails, text messages, and you don't get a reply. They don't respond. And so I had to go into the courthouse with evidence, with the emails, with the letters, and make a case to say this is against my human rights. And finally, the court decided to suspend the date. There hadn't been any vulnerability report. Social services hadn't done their job. The only thing that they did was apparently send a letter in the middle of 2023 that I didn't receive. And so because I didn't receive the letter, which was supposedly an appointment in August of 2023, and I didn't turn up to the appointment, they said there is no vulnerability report because I failed to turn up to the appointment. So that was another failure. It's just been one long whole scenario of failures. So there was another case that I was involved in. So the past partner wasn't content. He wasn't content with evicting me, making me homeless in Spain. He then decided to take criminal allegations against me, 7 criminal allegations with 17 years of prison attached. And I was again appointed another free lawyer from the prosecution in the court. And I think I got a text message, and I looked up the name of this lawyer to find out that he had a doctorate in civil law. And I thought, well, that's not criminal law. I'm going to be in a case within weeks of being given the criminal court documents. I was told it was going to be November, the first hearing was going to be November. I was in a total panic, as anybody would be. And I asked that free lawyer, how many cases has he taken in the criminal court with a case of defamation, 6 other allegations with a 17 years maximum penalties being requested by the other lawyer? And I didn't get any reply. So I sacked that lawyer, and I told the court, the prosecutor, that I won't get a fair hearing because I wasn't going to use that lawyer, and I was trying to find another lawyer who knew about criminal law. And so the date was suspended in 2022. The court was November 2022, and that date was suspended. It wasn't heard until September 2023 because of the delays, because of this, the strikes. in the justice system. And so it took a long time to go through the court. After that, by the end of 2023, when they'd set the date for the eviction, I also heard on the same month that 5 of the criminal allegations had been dismissed, which was bittersweet. 1, I'm going to be evicted. 2, 5 allegations have now been dismissed. And so I've been in this tremendous amount of litigation abuses, basically. Litigation abuses by a former partner, and the legal intimidation, the threats that he'd threatened me before even he'd taken any legal action, threatened that he would return in 4 months. He gave that deadline that you've got until January, and if you haven't bought this house, and if this house isn't sold, then I'm coming back and you're going to be out. So, I've been under a lot of stress, trauma, anxiety, insomnia, panic attacks. There's been a lot of stress, basically. And it's not over yet. There is a lot of legal issues that still haven't been addressed. First, in 2023, I was told to file a claim of coercion with the police because the water and the electricity were terminated at the house. And to this date, in 2025, there still is no running water. And that is another violation, Article 11 violation, no access to fresh water and sanitation. So this, on top of all the other things, there is still a lot of questions and a lot of legal issues going on here. So looking at this, my survivor's legal survival guide is, you're really in a trauma situation. Many solicitors and lawyers are not trauma informed. Lots of them haven't any background in gender violence. They don't know about the hidden forms of abuse, like psychological abuse, emotional abuse. They don't know much about financial abuse, which is actually part of the Istanbul Convention and has been adopted in the UK in the new domestic abuse bill. Surviving economic abuse campaigned a long time to get that put through. Economic abuse is also a crime in Spain as well. It's been in the Supreme Court of Justice. There's been cases of economic abuse, financial abuse. So the situation of a victim having to go forward to make complaints, there's often massive barriers to get legal representation. And those barriers are usually financial barriers, because there's not that many lawyers that are out there who will work on a free basis or pro bono. I had been given the list of lawyers that were cross-border and in Spain. And those of that list were given by the British Embassy in Spain. And I contact a lot of different lawyers going through this process before the court documents were served in the first place. and the advice is not very good. And because you're in a shock, trauma, grief situation, as a survivor, you are not able to be confident enough to advocate for yourself. I remember speaking to one lawyer who said he would do a Zoom meeting. It was a cross-border litigation. I'd sent some of the evidence over. I'd sent him the 26-minute recording that was showing the intimidation and threats and stuff, plus the other side of it, which were the financial offers. And that lawyer in that Zoom meeting said to me, I've not listened to all of that recording. I wasn't strong enough at that point to point out to that lawyer, how can you give me advice in this meeting if you have not listened to that recording in full? Now, I wasn't strong enough to say something like that. That solicitor was there in that Zoom meeting. He said at the end of that one, he would send me his quote. And the fees that he quoted were between $3,000 and $5,000 in order to represent me in a cross-border litigation. There was nowhere I had that money to pay for that legal representation. And so that is how survivors are failed. Financially, they don't have the money to pay for legal representation. They can't find pro bono lawyers. Quite often, they're not interested in taking cases on. And the other thing is that a lot of the solicitors don't know about coercive control. They don't know about emotional and psychological abuse. They don't know about all of the hidden forms of abuse that go on. And so when you talk to them and you say it's emotional and psychological abuse, you get the answer back. It's very difficult to prove emotional and psychological abuse. So there's another barrier to get legal representation. So that is been my journey over the last 4 years. And in October of 2024, on the very last day of the Domestic Violence Awareness Month, the criminal lawyer who was in the case for the 7 allegations that were made against me rang to tell me that the last 2 allegations had been dismissed in the court. And again, that news was bittersweet because in October, that same month, I was given another eviction date, and they had set an eviction date for 6 days before Christmas, the 19th of December of 2024. And again, I'm still here. So I have been through 2 suspended evictions throughout 2024. And now it's 2025. And to be quite honest, I am still in a situation, I'm not safe, I'm not secure, my finances are not really good. And so I have set up a survival fund donation through Buy Me a Coffee. And the link for that is buymeacoffee.com/success with Loraine. And if you want to help me and help this podcast, then I'll leave that link in the show notes and underneath this video. And thank you for listening to our podcast today. And see you on the next podcast. And in April, I have a couple of guests who are going to join me, and I'm hoping we can continue this podcast as long as possible. And if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, please leave comment under the video or look up the bio and then reach out. I'm on various platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, and I'm on X, which was Twitter. So you can, look me up if you want to chat, or even if you're interested in coming on my podcast to talk about your journey, anything to do with overcoming challenges, or focused on the topics of mindset, money, success. I'd love to chat to you on another future podcast. So please, just reach out and let's chat. Bye for now.